ladies, gentlemen, my esteemed guests. My name is Emily Sophia, and I am going to be walking you through, as well as my Irish cream latte, the latest of NBC's Hannibal, so spoiler alert. Before we get into the mad and gruesome thick of things, as I will be bearing all in this review. And just for those of you who have been keeping up with Bates Motel, if you're getting caught up, feel free to watch my latest review of that show. I have a link in the description for you if you'd like to check that out. I've been having a lot of fun trying to reply to comments. I'm trying to do that more with my videos, so feel free to, of course, leave any and all thoughts about anything, preferably stuff that's pertinent to the show, but I have been really enjoying going through these series with you all. It's been quite a blast. So, let us dive right on into things, shall we? I really got a kick out of tonight's episode. Well, I say tonight, actually. It is currently 2:12 p.m. on a Saturday, so my sense of time is somewhat skewed, and I hope that you'll forgive me for that. But anyways, that was a great ride, and I was really nervous from the preview from last week. I was really nervous about this episode. I honestly was a little bit turned off at the killer of the week that they hinted at with the whole man becoming animal, and I knew that it was gonna be super visceral, gutsy nastiness, and I'd had my fair share after last week. But the way that they do these things, the way that they handle these crazy over-the-top killers, somehow manages to be breathtakingly artistic. And so here I am, sitting here analyzing the cinematography, the way that the blood spews and like cascades, and I'm just like, what is happening to me? I feel, I've said this before, but watching this show, I almost feel like Hannibal is behind the whole thing. We're watching a show about Hannibal, but I feel like kind of this Will Graham type figure whose darkness is being teased out as I'm invited to enjoy these things or enjoy the way that they're presented. So what I really liked about this week especially was that we're getting to see it's not just about these murders of the week. It's not just about getting to Will Graham's head. It's sort of seeing the broader network of, well, Hannibal's body of work. This is basically an extreme case scenario of all your individual friends getting together and becoming friends and frenemies all at once. You know, all the complications that ensue when your friends start being friends. What do you do then? And this is another metaphor that I've used. I know that I referred to it in my reviews from the last season of Hannibal, but we see all the more that he is operating as this great puppeteer. There is nothing that is accidental in his book. It was no accident that Randall came flying through Will Graham's window in full bear form. It was no accident, I mean, really any of the pieces, any of the encounters between Hannibal's patients and former patients and all these people who have come into contact with him. Even if they are meeting on their own terms, Hannibal manages to be behind everything. And what was also fascinating about this week's episode was its focus on the question of what is savagery and kind of deconstructing that notion. You know, you think that thinking like an animal means that you have a deficit in mental capacities, that you lack the ability to reason and to interact with others on a human level. But of course we see that Hannibal and his school of thought, he holds that accessing this kind of savagery, this unhumanness, is a way to transcend humanity. It's not descending below it. It's not failing to meet the standards that we as Homo sapiens in society should meet. It is transcending humanness itself. It is acknowledging your human nature and social limitations, and then going beyond that anyway. And as I live tweeted this earlier, but basically what we see here is that Hannibal he works at some kind of like butterfly hatchery. He's got all these little cocoons and he just injects them with his murderous virtue, giving birth to these beautiful butterflies, which he just watches as they flit around, and he tries to play some kind of part in the mayhem that they will inevitably wreak on mankind. I mean, because that was something that was touched on in last week's episode, you know, as Hannibal's basically talking about this metaphor of Will Graham bursting forth from his cocoon. He is in the process of becoming, you know, and Hannibal talks about adapting one's behavior, and the way that Will Graham replies to that, he says, you know, he kind of repeats in that therapy session of theirs, adapt, evolve, and become. And that's what Hannibal says later on to Randall as he is preparing to go full bear status. He tells him that he has become, that he has reached his highest form, and that he has transcended. And Hannibal very much relishes the opportunity to explore these ideas of savagery, being that he not only knows the guy who is behind the man-turned-beast scenarios that we see going on, that Jack and Will are confronting, but he's also trying to get Will to be more intimate in his violent relationship with the world. You know, Hannibal teases out from Will's fantasies of killing Hannibal with his hands, and yet every kill and every, you know, the quiet sense of power that Will gets every time that has come has been from a situation involving a gun, and Hannibal argues that he is hiding behind that gun. Perhaps as some people might hide behind their cell phones on a first date, you know? I mean, this is the way that Hannibal sees the world, and the way that he wants to get anybody who knows him and who's in his inner circle. And that's the way that he wants them to see things too. And they have to arrive at that place themselves and be willing to, it's like the, oh, you know that Hitch movie, the one with Will Smith, I forget what it is the 90-10 or whatever, you know, it's like you go all the way or almost all the way and then that person comes to it. That's kind of, I mean, Hannibal's kind of like, he's kind of like Hitch, you know? That is an epiphany that I just had, and I don't know how comfortable I feel with that concept. But, so when Will is sort of talking about the way that Randall thinks when he confronts and you know, strews his victims about, it is just about killing, it is just about instinct, it isn't anything personal, it is just the act of doing it. And what Hannibal says to that is that Will Graham needs to be intimate with his instincts, and that is ultimately the situation that Hannibal sets up when he goes to encourage Randall and to affirm him in what he's done. The former teacher coming to the pupil with stars in his eyes, and you know, at this unfolding vision of grandeur, it kind of makes me think of Breaking Bad. This alternate universe where where Walter White comes suggesting is like, man, the person that I pretty much have made you become with my power and greed mongerness, it's a beautiful thing. That's what it kind of makes me think of, in a sort of not entirely parallels, not direct, but that's the way that I try and think. At any rate, so Hannibal he unleashes the bear upon Will. And now Will is abiding by, in this situation at the end of the episode, he's abiding by his instinct to freaking protect his dogs, his family. So there's that instinct. But there's also this growing monster inside of him too that is becoming sentient, that's you know, he has his own instincts, his desire for a visceral reckoning, sort of like what Will Graham imagines in the dream sequence at the very beginning, where he's got the Wendigo tied up to the tree, tied to the stag, you know, so he's got this whole rope system, so that with every whistle, he gets the, I think that was a stag, right? If I'm picturing the imagery correctly. So the stag pulls the rope, tightening the noose, tightening this entire system of ropes that are around him. And then at the very end, we get that Katy Perry fireworks moment from behind the tree, where we just see this explosion of blood. I laughed at that part because it was just so... I want to know how they filmed that. I would have loved to see the behind the scenes sequence for that moment. Did they have like a flippin' cannon, or they just have everybody, you know, raise their glass, just throw up a little bit of internal stuff? I mean, that was a really funny moment to me. Artistic, but just hilarious because it's so outlandish. I think that I'm getting to the point where a lot of the violence, as grotesque as it is so operatic and theatrical and over the top, that I just sit there and I'm like, wow, I mean, I wonder like how much like fake blood went into this. I mean, I wonder how they decided that they wanted to like spew this stuff around. I mean, all the, you know, I'm thinking techniques and the presentation of it. Anyway, I digress. I love the visuality of this show. It's ridiculous, and it makes me feel a little bit dirty, but it also makes me feel like a connoisseur of fine art, because I'm invited to interpret what I'm seeing and why it's shown that way. At any rate, so going back to the matter of instincts. So Will, he takes his gun with him when he goes to try and trail after Buster, and I was pitching a fit. And all my helpless viewer rage screaming against everything that was unfolding on the screen. And I was so terrified that like all of Will's dogs were going to be slaughtered, and that's like basically my worst nightmare for the show, because that would be the thing that would like push Will Graham over to the point of complete and utter no return, and I'm not ready to see him get there. I'm just not. So he goes up into the woods. He has his gun, so he has this means of staving off his own desire to be intimate with his violent urges, and really it's just about protecting his dog. Will continues to have this deeply empathetic and protective side to him, which is that humanness that we as viewers cling to. So there's that aspect of things, but then he goes back into his house and he begins to turn off all of the lights as he prepares to confront Randall, as he prepares for Randall to confront him, and how they're going to come together in that sort of 90-10 thing, you know? One's coming almost all the way, and the other has to choose to meet them and complete the experience. And so in that moment, we see as the camera zooming in on Will as he turns off that final lamplight that he is entering into the darkness, and he is preparing for what's about to transpire. And that's something that next week's episode is going to explore. We're going to be moving back in time to reconstruct what exactly happened and how Will brought about this reckoning. So they're all even Stevens at the end, as Will Graham said, and that was a great quote to end the episode on. Hannibal sends somebody to kill Will, just as Will sent somebody to kill Hannibal, and then, you know, the way that things transpire from there. And this is a situation in which Will's intimacy has been unlocked, and he is willing to get out from behind his gun and to explore the side of him that Hannibal wants him to get cozy with. So that was just a crazy, I loved just the progression of things, because I'm constantly surprised and shocked by what this show does, and by all the twists and what Hannibal is up to. I feel like he's always just a few steps ahead, just as he is with everybody else that he is around in the show. The show continues to be steps ahead of us, and I like it. I like that it doesn't just cater to my limited conceptions of what exactly, what kind of evil am I seeing here. It's always something far, far worse. And that, for Hannibal, is the beauty of the world, that there is always more. There is a way to transcend, and that what is seen as savagery is a way to be the best you. I mean, can you imagine Hannibal as like a motivational speaker? Like, you know, kind of like a Jordan Chase figure from Dexter. Except this would be a far, far more interesting experience. Goodness gracious. A few other things that I loved about the episode, and again, feel free to fill in any of the blanks that I've left in. I like the way that they're developing Margot as a character, that she's come into contact with Will, and that Hannibal kind of gets to sit back and sort of see what happens when his patients, as Will says, compare notes. Of course, Margot's a little bit thrown off by Hannibal's complete and utter acceptance, if not total endorsement of her desire to kill her brother, for which she thanks Hannibal. But then that sparks her curiosity about the curious case of William Graham, which I think is entirely fair, and Hannibal just kind of turns it into an array of questions like, well, what would you think that I'd let him get away with? If he's telling Margot, if at first you don't succeed, try again. What kind of message is he preaching? Out of what gospel is he building Will's program? And there's that. We get to see more into this really disturbing transcendent side of Hannibal Lecter that's got this sort of spirituality and this religious tone to it as he talks about God and thinking about God in his approach to violence. Will is constantly trying to tease out Hannibal's full truth. And he's not gonna come out and say the words, but he says every single word that is completely and utterly indicative of who he truly is. He never fully sidesteps. That's the thing that's so infuriating about Hannibal, is he's constantly revealing himself to the world. You just gotta have your ears set, you know, tuned into the right station. Because pretty much everybody around Hannibal is caught in this constant static between stations. Between here's the Hannibal we see and here's who he truly is. But then if you just adjust the knob ever so slightly, like you think you're listening to the station and then you twist it to the right and it's like, oh hey, like here's the true jam. You know, the true jam. What the heck? That was a weird juxtaposition of words, but you know, you start dancing like, all right, this is it. That's kind of what Hannibal's like. He just sort of throws off the wavelengths and messes with the system. But I really enjoyed that first confrontation with Will Graham and Margot, where the way that he has to like identify himself as, oh hey, you know, I'm the guy who didn't kill all those people. And he could just say that without any kind of context. You know, at all the social events where he's trying to make the small talk, he could just say that and everybody just gets it. So he's sort of, both he and Margot have this sort of celebrityness about them. Margot comes from a very successful meatpacking family, but she's not really next in line to get into the industry. She's not next in what I'm assuming is a really kind of patriarchal system. She's really marginalized by her family, it seems, not only by the ways in which her brother dehumanizes her, compelling her to do the same thing, but the fact that, and as she very subtly says, that she has the wrong parts and the wrong proclivity for parts. So that, of course, referring to her femininity, and thus she's out of the running. And then also the fact that, and I believe that the latter part of that line was referring to her lesbianism, which was a part of her character in the books. I know a lot of people were really frustrated with the way that that Fuller and Company changed her character, but that still remains something that's intact, albeit it's very subtly presented, but I think it's a really fascinating take on her character as well. So they settle down, the two of them, Will and Margot, settle down for a little bit of whiskey on a cold, cold night. Why does it always seem to be... I guess I have a really poor sense of timeline when it comes to the show, because it seems like it's always snowing. It's perpetual winter. They're like in the North Pole or something, because every time we see a dinner scene at Hannibal's place, there's snow that's falling outside. I mean, unless he just kind of makes his own snow as a little bit of ambiance, you know, to make everyone feel nice and warm in the oven of his home as compared to the coldness of the world without. I don't know what it frickin' is. I don't know, but it's just kind of tripping me out. Anyways, so they start to share notes, looking in each other's diaries of experience, trying to see what's going on, why they're both under Lecter's counsel. And so Margot reveals that she tried to kill her brother, and Will counters that he probably had it coming. So Margot then inquires, you know, quid pro quo, and Will says that he tried to kill Hannibal Lecter, to which Margot, you know, eyebrow raises a few stories, and she's like, did he have it coming? And then they sort of sit there, just basking in the ambiguity of it all, as they're both of these individuals are people whose killer habits or killer desires Hannibal is trying to cultivate. So they're both kind of sitting there like, what are we doing exactly? Which I think is a very valid question for them to both be asking. They can't really get into Hannibal, but they can't really get away, being that Hannibal is the one who's kind of in them. So that's a really interesting collision. Again, really interesting also the way that they developed Randall's character and the encounters that Hannibal has as he gets to confront this person who he originally had met, someone with this personality or mood disorder who felt that he had been given the wrong body and that inside of him there was a creature waiting to be unleashed. And Hannibal essentially helped construct this deeply compartmentalized person who has this life, who works hard, who contributes to society in some way by preserving and educating people on these bones, which, being that he's got a pretty intimate knowledge of them, he takes that and uses that knowledge and uses the desires behind that knowledge to create this alternate higher self. And if this guy is gonna go down, Hannibal wants him to go down in that form. And that's pretty much why he sacrifices him to Will. He's both predator and prey. So he Hannibal essentially from afar, from his little place of removedness, he sticks them on each other, basically. It's quite terrifying, but ain't that what this show is? I mean, let's be real. Again, just so many astonishing moments and intricacies and really, really macabre humor throughout. But that's pretty much our bread and butter when it comes to this kind of stuff. Again, I really like the way that they handled this concept of savagery as embodied in this killer, in that it had these deeply metaphorical implications and contributed to the development of Will as he's starting to lose himself and yet find himself at the same time. And the fact that he and Hannibal are smiling at each other in next week's promo, the one that showed right at the end of the episode, that's a red alert case right there. There is something up. I mean, of course, Hannibal knows what Will's done, and as Will comes to grips with the grips that he came to with Randall, it's gonna change the nature of the game quite a pretty little bit. The one thing I was disappointed about was that we didn't get to physically see Bedelia, and I really want to see her again because she's kind of my woman, and I enjoy the living crap out of her. Especially just, she's outsmarted the entire game. I've said it once, I'll say it again. She is something else, and I do feel that she will be her own kind of reckoning force later on. At least she'd better be. I don't see her being or becoming a victim. And that's not to say that anyone who's been victimized in the show necessarily deserved it. That's another thing I like about this show, is that it doesn't play out like the classic horror film where they pit you against these victim characters or make you think that they're stupid, and since they're stupid, well, they had it coming. The fact of the matter is that everyone who is in the picture is at least smart, and at least using the parts of their brain, you know, reason and logic, and that even if they are blind in some respects, they're not completely and utterly out of it. They're not, you know, doing some satanic ritual in the woods and then thinking that they can just go back to the sleepover and call it good, like the classic kind of horror film does. The fact of the matter is that everybody is, their IQs are in a pretty okay place. And that's what makes things even scarier, is that we feel like we're pretty smart as the audience, but what do we know? What do they know? And that's what kind of makes it this sort of, this really crazy experience, that everything we see in the show and the characters, we kind of experience ourselves in watching it. That's why people should watch stuff like this. It challenges the living hell out of your intellect, and it makes you pretty much scared for life. It's great. Anyways, so of course, Will, in the process of trying to get a better picture of this Mona Lisa Hannibal that he's dealing with, this subtle smile ever on his face, and Will knows the truth, and he's seen that truth, and he has pointed his gun at that truth. But the question is, who is this guy in his entirety, and is it something that can be grasped? So he asks what happened to Bedelia, and no, Hannibal was a little bit slow on the uptake, but I think that that was really just kind of a play for himself. You know, if it's all theatrics for Hannibal, the fact that he came after Bedelia after she left doesn't seem like it'd be an accident. It's more kind of like a, I wonder in what state you evaded this situation, just to kind of see, like, alright, I can respect this woman. That's the way I see it. So, she's still a looming factor. I think that Chilton is also still a looming factor. There's a lot that's in the shadows right now. Bedelia, Bella, and Chilton, those are three people that we know of, and we haven't come into contact with Mason yet, but that is going to be a really fascinating situation and exciting to see unfold. I'm looking at my tweets right now just to make sure I didn't totally forget anything. Yeah, I mean, just a really, I think that I touched on most stuff. We're gonna see a little bit more of Alana and Freddie Lowndes actually in this next week's episode. And I like that the show doesn't feel the pressure to show each and every character every single week, and that we have specific arcs that are focused on. And so again, what it all came down to this week was the issues of dehumanization and savagery. Is dehumanizing a humanizing process for the one who dehumanizes? You know, because there was this whole dehumanizing thing going on between Hannibal and Margot, and they're kind of trying to break it down, and it's like it becomes the cycle, and that's the cycle in which Hannibal lives, and he's like, hey, I'm just saying, like, it's a pretty fun life that I've got here. Oh, my darling dearest, the things that you do to our minds and to our William. Yeah, and like, oh, I think I was also gonna ask, who's been your favorite kind of killer of the week figure. I'd be curious to know what you guys think, because each episode, each type of killer has its own aesthetic and has its own way that it relates to and furthers the plots with the main character. So that's just something I've been thinking about and something that I'm kind of starting to appreciate. Yeah, it's just been such an exhilarating journey to see, is this going to be Will's reckoning against Hannibal or against his former self? Because for Will, it's all sort of this acting out of revenge against Hannibal, but it's not just that. Because Hannibal is the one who is orchestrating the enactment of this revenge. And so I think ultimately it's going to turn into something else entirely, something that I think that we can guess at, but again, I think that we're always going to be a few steps behind the master plan. So, leave all your thoughts and contribute to things. I'd love to hear what you guys think. It's been a fun week. I'll be back tomorrow with Game of Thrones, again with Bates Motel. I'll be graduating soon, and then I'll be taking on a slew of other series as well, so I'm very excited for that. And hopefully getting back to my music too. So thank you super much for watching. Fill in the blanks that I inevitably left, and I will duke it out with all y'all. That being said, take care, and I will be back before you know it.